Welcome to It's What Our Characters Would Do, the podcast where a neutral good ranger and a chaotic neutral warlock talk about RPGs, roll funny dice, and give away some sweet loot. I'm Bob Worldbuilder.
And I'm Grace World Destroyer.
And today, we're talking about modes of play, as in theater of mind, your map, minis and terrain, all that kind of stuff. And we're giving away $40 of credit on ziptokens.com.
Whoa, $40 of credit?
You can probably buy a lot of tokens with that. The person who runs that site reached out to me about giving me stuff, and I was like, well, I don't actually use tokens a lot, but I'm sure someone else will. I bet somebody out there uses tokens. So, yeah, figured it'd make a good giveaway. But first, Grace, how you feeling today?
We kind of forgot about recording this podcast today.
Yeah, so we're doing this on the weekend now to correct for Blender Brain. Blender Brain.
Yeah, I need to prep today too. I have a session tonight.
Yeah.
I've been a little low on inspiration lately. So I was thinking of just like drawing a map, making some crazy new monster that they're going to hate, and calling it a day.
Yeah. That's what you like to do, right?
Yeah.
Making some crazy monsters.
Yep. I'm thinking of a beholder with all their eyes gouged out.
Oh.
But they make up for the lack of eyes with other stuff.
It's all ears.
Maybe.
Yeah, that'd be cool. You feeling better then than a normal 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock evening when we would be recording this otherwise?
A little bit, but we were also up really late last night.
We were?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a late D&D session yesterday.
Gotta get those cubes. Gotta get those puzzle cubes in Schult.
Yep.
The
Playing
cubes.
some Tomb Annihilation. I guess we're technically like halfway, maybe a little more than halfway. Secret City of Omu.
The cubes are the key.
Need those cubes, and then they're gonna figure out how to use them to get into the tomb. But it was a fun session.
Yeah.
And during that session, we totally didn't use any maps or minis or anything.
That's
to
true.
Get on topic.
Well, we did use one map.
We sort of used a map. You're right.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Well,
but only so that we could comprehend like what a certain shrine was supposed to look like.
So let's talk about it. Today, we're ready for the quick build, where we try to summarize this topic or go over this episode in exactly 3d6 words.
We changed the rules.
Yeah, no more 3d6 words or less because it's too easy. It's probably still not that hard, but I really like the idea of keeping it 3d6 something.
Yeah.
So.
Do you want to roll since I'm going to?
Yeah. Here we go. Ooh, only 7. That might be the lowest we ever had.
Do you really need a map? No.
All right. So very strong opinion right out of the gate. How do you feel about that? Because we used maps for a long time.
We did.
Most of our D&D career heavily mapped.
Yeah, but once you go no map, you never go
map.
Map. You never go BAP.
Yeah.
Really? My feelings now is that movement speed is stupid. Well, okay, movement speed isn't stupid. Counting squares is stupid.
Yeah. And let's not, this is how we've been playing. It's been fun. I don't want to, obviously probably 50% or more of people use the rules of movement speed
that's true.
And use maps. So not saying this is the way.
Okay, so
but it could be the way for you if you give it a shot.
You wanna run up to an enemy and do a really cool thing.
Yeah.
But you're 5 feet short of movement.
Yeah.
And on their next turn, the enemy's just gonna move another 30 feet away, and you'll never get to do it. If you don't count the squares, it's like, what difference does 5 feet really make?
Yeah.
Just run up to them and do the thing.
Some people could argue, and because when I've mentioned this in videos recently, it's, there's the idea of, it's way more tactical and strategic if you're counting everything, which totally has its merits. But I think, at least for us, I think you guys enjoy, because I'm running the game. So as players, I think this group tends to enjoy being more tactical about just what you're going to do on your turn regarding your abilities rather than your speed.
But overall, we enjoy more cinematic combat.
Yeah.
And I do still like having it drawn out, like, where everybody is, because we can still be tactical that way without getting too, like, obsessed with exactly where everyone is.
Right.
And it still helps for, like, I'm playing a druid, so if I need to do an AoE, I can see, like, okay, how many people can I catch without, like, cheesing it too much and assuming that everyone is, like, grouped up when they're not.
Well, and that's a good, because what I was about to say is that I think the way we've been doing it, which for clarity is we have a small dry erase board that's really just like a thin piece of plastic, and there's no grid on it, or at least like one side is gridless, and we use that side to just sketch some X's and O's pretty much, and like an outline of the room, you know, if there's anything in the room. That's what our maps look like. And what you just said is, you know, the assumption of like whether or not people are grouped. I think that's pretty much when we break it out, is when it's not just a single group of enemies. Mm-hmm. It's like if there's like a really good recent battle, which I think it was important for because it was a deadly battle, was our previous session, not last night, but the week before, where we had allies kind of in one corner, or I should say like part of the party in one corner with one enemy there. And then there was most of the enemies and like, I think just you or maybe one other PC kind of far away. We just had like 2 moves away. And then it kind of got split into 3 groups over the course of that fight, where it was like people on one far end and then people in the middle. And then, you know, so it's kind of these 3 areas. And like, yeah, that would have been hard to do theater of mind. Like, oh, wait, who's where? And like, how many enemies are there versus like in that group? So it's good for keeping track of those smaller groups of enemies and player characters.
Mm-hmm. Plus, like, we're not really using attacks of opportunity.
Nope.
And we're not using flanking either. Yeah. So we don't really need to know exactly where everyone is since we're not using that.
Yeah.
It's like if we were, then yeah, I'd want to know if I could actually flank someone or not.
Right. Yeah, we did flanking for a long time, but I think it just became, for me, it was like, then people will always just like try to get in that flanking position. Yeah, and then you definitely need
create
the squares,
a chain of flanks, which, and then it's like, it's too much advantage. And, you know, the character's already way more powerful than, like, you want them to be as a DM.
Yeah.
Like, you talk about this a lot.
Yeah, and part of it was how, you know, I also did want to start using these, like, coin rerolls. So, like, you can already kind of have advantage in that way on stuff.
But you have to earn it. You got to earn those coins. First one's free, but the rest you got to earn.
Yeah. Whereas, like, advantage, it's too easy to flank somebody.
Yeah.
Kind of. So, it's like, you can just always have advantage pretty much. And you get into the no one ever moves. And even now, it's like, I don't know if it's I'm forgetting about the lack of opportunity attacks, or I'm just like, well, unless the enemies are fleeing, they don't really have a lot of reason to like move around in most of the combats we've had set up.
If we had gotten into combat like near that guardhouse at the entrance to Omu, I could see them like coming out and then returning to cover.
Yeah.
Where we couldn't get them in the guardhouse. But other than that, yeah, we're just out in the jungle. Like, we don't really have much reason to disengage either.
Yeah, most of our fights in this campaign have been just in wilderness. And I haven't been big on, like, describing certain terrain in those fights either. Like, maybe that's something I could have done better, is like, oh, this one has a small ravine running through it, or, you know.
But in the dungeon, there can be more of that, because if the monsters are in some kind of fortified position, or they know where the traps are and we don't, they can retreat behind a trap, and then
that's a really good point.
We would follow them and trigger it. That's some Dark Souls behavior there.
Yeah. Give me things to think about here.
Yeah, but if I hadn't been using like flanking and attacks of opportunity and all that stuff for 2 years in my current campaign, like, I would just get rid of them.
Converted.
Yeah. I mean, so I did tell them, One day I was like, guys, I don't care about movement anymore. We're just not going to use a grid.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but we're still using flanking and attacks of opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, when you're mid-campaign, like you said,
yeah, it's too hard to switch
for so long. It's like everybody might not be on board. It's easier to get player buy-in to do a thing when you're starting fresh.
Yeah, but when I start running Waldergeep Descent into the Dragon's Heist. I'm just going to use the same rule set that we've been using because everybody's already agreed to it. And,
true. Now we have like the same group.
And it's fun.
Working on that.
So.
Yeah, I just find it's a lot faster. Like even last night we had a combat setup where it was one room. There was a big statue in the middle of it. And there were only 3 enemies, 5 or 6. How many player characters do we have? 5?
5.
Yeah. And you guys had kind of run around the statue. So you were sort of split into 2 groups. The enemies were still in one group. And I had drawn it out just for the sake of like explaining this room and what you could see and couldn't see. And then we still used that for the fight. And even at the beginning of that fight, I was thinking like, oh, I almost want to just erase this. Because it was pretty much one group of enemies. And I just felt like even the picture, even though it's so bare bones, would slow things down a little compared to just pure theater of mind. But it was fun.
I don't think it made a difference.
I don't think it did in that fight either. But
I mean, it was helpful because we were using a piece of the terrain to our advantage. We did a pincer attack around the statue, but yeah.
But overall, like I started D&D playing that way. Like that's what I probably have mentioned this on the podcast and told you about it before. But when Dan was running our first campaign, it was mostly theater of mind, and then sometimes he had a big like sketch pad, like drawing pad, and would just draw basically what we did there, but just like with pen or pencil or something.
In my first campaign that I ran, which wound up being over Roll20, when we discovered that, I was running the Princes of the Apocalypse. And I got like so obsessed with drawing out every map, like one for one. I would spend hours every day doing it. And I just like burned out on it so much. Yeah. And I got like frustrated.
The entire campaign was pretty much mapped. Cause
it was all maps because it was all dungeon.
Yeah.
And then like if you guys wanted to go into a place that I hadn't mapped yet, I'd be like, well, I can't run this now. I don't have a map, which is
where it's like realistically we probably didn't need a map for most of it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's easy to get carried away with the maps. The maps can be fun, and that's why I think a lot of people use them.
So the next thing I want to say is if you're the type that loves to use terrain,
sure,
like you actually physically build your dungeons, that's a whole other thing. Because it's like you spend all that time creating all these set pieces that have this grid.
Right.
I think that's still fun.
Yeah.
Because you have this really cool thing to look at and move through.
That's easy, too, for the whole group to enjoy that. And I think I feel like that style of play probably appeals to everybody a little more. Because I'm thinking of somebody who's never played a role-playing game, too. Like, if you were to set out this, like, cool little board and there's all these little land features or, like, maybe it's a town or something. I just think, it makes it more immersive, makes it feel a little more like a game for people who are more familiar with like board games or something, because most people are more familiar with that than they are with role-playing games, like for the first time anyway.
Yeah, but like using a grid on set pieces versus just using a flat board, way more fun if you have that terrain. Because like you're engaging with something instead of just like,
I think I see what you're saying. Yeah, like you're talking about having kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like dwarven forge terrain where everything's actually like 5-foot squares technically versus just like a land feature that doesn't have anything.
Yeah, but I would say like my ideal form would be you have the terrain, but like it just doesn't have squares on it. And you can still move freely without counting.
Okay. Right. Because the
counting thing is what I'm really like.
Right. Because
and then you get into diagonals.
Yeah. That... That's funny you should say that because that's something I haven't thought about in a long time. I think even for a while when I was still using grids, we would just kind of, I don't know. I feel like it was still like, okay, 5 squares is like yay big and you sort of measure it out with your hand. Actually, no, we were mostly playing online for a long period. And then you had the rulers
so they made
to
the tools that,
Yeah, but playing in person, Having to count diagonals just makes it so annoying for some reason. And I guess you could always use a hex grid. Then you don't have to worry about diagonals as much. Maybe that is the purest form of gridded play. But yeah, in our case, it's just been really smooth without any kind of grid. And we've also never dabbled a lot in using physical terrain. Like we've never really...
You did make a bunch.
Yeah.
You made tiles.
So I did make some dungeon tiles probably only like a year or so into us, like being together and playing together and stuff. And we used them a bit, but I don't think I was running that game. So it was like, that was when you were running, right? That Barrows Keep something?
Yeah, that might have been when you made it. Yeah.
So it's like if I were running the game, I would have a better idea of like, okay, here's the setup I want to do probably. But yeah, it just didn't like work out that way. So yeah, never. And it was then it became also like a matter of space, because I think once you get into minis and terrain as its own hobby, it's like you have the gear for making all the stuff and like painting it, crafting it, whatever, and then the space for actually storing all this stuff over time. And we just don't have that now and haven't for the whole time that we've been together and playing games.
And I don't know if we ever will.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we're going to take a tiny, small break and then come back and hear about what other people have to say about this.
Yay.
Yay, we're back.
Here we are.
And I did just think of something while we were taking a little break there, because obviously we're giving away some sweet credit to get some tokens. I don't want to be like totally 100% theater of mind only or like drawings only, because actually something I had been thinking about was getting or even making some like little game pieces that we could just have. Because when we're drawing like the X's and O's or whatever, like the letter of the character's name and stuff, and then people do move, we're kind of constantly like erasing and rewriting those things. So having still the blank gridless map that you can freely dry erase, draw the map on, but then like some tiny pieces, like smaller diameter than a mini for sure, I think would still be kind of nice.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just thinking about that. But now we are ready for a random encounter where we roll to read your stories and questions, generally about this topic, and the person who wrote our favorite story or question takes home the loot. And yeah, we can roll.
Rolling is my job.
Yeah.
1.
1 is from Camel X. Do you guys think that the theater of mind leads to more creative solutions from the players and the DM? I've noticed that my players ask a lot more questions and try to get away with more stuff, which I'm all for in most instances. And me as a DM, I feel encouraged to describe the environment in as much detail as I possibly can. Also, is there a preferred way you like your GMs to run combat?
I think theater of mind does lead to more creative solutions, because the players can ask, oh, is there this thing here? And then the DM can say, you know what? Yeah, that thing is there.
Yeah. And I'll say most time when you guys do ask things like that, I'll still leave it up to a roll.
Yeah.
Like I'll roll a d6 and I'll just think about, either like should it be 50-50 shot, or should it be like a little more or a little less in your favor?
But then if you have everything like fully concrete drawn out,
yeah, you can't have that freedom.
It's like then the players don't even think to ask, because they're like, oh yeah, it's all right there. This is what we have at our disposal.
And I think there's still a level where then the map is good, because if you actually have a very detailed map that has a lot of dungeon dressing kind of stuff too, that the players could interact with, and like normally they might not, but maybe like, oh, I want to break the leg off that table and like try to wedge the door with it or something. Like there can be a point where having a drawn out map with lots of little details can create creativity or like opportunities for those creative solutions as well. But I think you kind of have to be on one of the extremes of mostly theater of mind, where there's like pretty much no details, or tons of details drawn in. And obviously that one's a lot harder to prep unless you're getting highly detailed maps somewhere, which you could be.
Mm-hmm.
But in between, where you just have like, your 5-foot grid and like a pretty basic map, you lose that, I think. I don't know. I guess it doesn't have to be that way because you could still have players asking those questions like, oh, could this be here? And hopefully, if you're a fun GM, you'll at least give it a reasonable chance of like whether or not a thing like that could be there.
I just think it's kind of human nature to when you see something all concrete, it's no longer formless.
Yeah, I agree. And to answer the second question in that, I think we established that we're
well established.
Both, at least, at this point in our GM careers and player careers, definitely happy with Theater of Mind. Who knows? Maybe that'll change, and I'll develop a massive hobby for crafting minis and terrain. Okay, you can roll again.
6.
Whoa. From Samuel Tier. When I started DMing online, I used a lot of maps and ran on Roll20. This sounds familiar. I found this required a lot more effort on my part to prep. It was enjoyable, but would eat up my time pretty quickly. Now I run almost all Theater of Mind with general maps. I have a map of the city or region to help the players see where they are and to remind me of what I need to describe. It has sped up my prep time. I do, however, advocate that maps be used on occasion for specific important combat scenarios or for a dungeon now and again. That being said, one of my favorite sessions to date was a crypt map that I created based off the first level of Pac-Man. My players were hired to acquire an item from the crypt. I took each of the ghosts from Pac-Man and tied them to an emotion based off their color. I even had the looping corridor that would move players from one side to the other side. My players spent time trying to strategically avoid the ghosts, and when they realized how similar it was to Pac-Man, it clicked for them that they needed something to weaken the ghosts in order to destroy them. Naturally, I hid the item they needed in the central chamber where the ghosts respawn after being defeated. In this instance, I think it would have been hard to give the players a full experience without a map and tokens.
It is. I think it's important to have a map for like boss battles.
Yeah.
At least.
Battles, and I still think they're on the right track here. Like for a dungeon, I think the GM needs to have that, or maybe doesn't need, but is better off having a clear picture of where things are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's helpful for you to have that in the book, and then you can try to relay that as best in as much detail as you want to, and hopefully, if it's coming from a book or something, it provides a resource for you just to share that whole map with your players if you want to go all in, like with as much detail as possible for them as well. But you don't always need it.
Yeah, this guy gets it. Drawing them all out on Roll20, I don't even know how I had the time to do it back then. I guess it was because
we didn't do anything else.
Yeah, we literally didn't do anything else. I didn't have like a Switch yet.
True. You weren't gaming
I wasn't gaming as much. I had a less like emotionally demanding job.
Yeah, totally true.
Yeah.
But definitely the gaming. Because that's like 3 hours a night, probably. Yeah. 3 hours a night.
What can I say?
You're a gamer.
I'm a gamer girl.
You're a gamer. Was there any questions in that? I mean, first of all, there's a great story. Really cool idea for a dungeon. And yeah, I think we're on the same page. No questions.
Maps do have their uses.
Absolutely.
Yes. We're not saying they don't.
Yeah.
Next.
5. From Se. Hello, Mrs. Destroyer and Mr. Builder. I prefer building maps in Dungeon Draft for my games, but will often use Theater of Mind for any scenes that feature crowds of people. What am I supposed to do? Add a static, boring image of throngs of people? If they scatter in a panic, then they're stuck there on my map. Or do I leave a huge empty space on my map and say, just imagine your minis aren't completely alone on that busy street. I've always struggled with depicting crowds unless I rely on Theater of Mind. Unless I rely on Theater of Mind. That's a good point. Not something I think of often.
You could just get like a bunch of M&Ms and toss them on the map.
Or it sounds like they might be doing virtual remote play.
Oh.
Like using Dungeon Draft.
In that case, you create a token for each individual townsperson, and then you move them one at a time.
I think that's exactly what they don't want to do. Each
townsperson should have their own turn in combat. So when they flee...
You monster. Yeah. I don't know if there's a way in, I guess, whatever tabletop you're using then to Like, can you link a bunch of tokens so they all move together?
I've never heard of Dungeon Draft before.
Oh, it's for building maps, but yeah, I've never used it. I think it's a paid thing, but it is pretty popular because it's detailed. And it's like one of these things where I think you can make as much detail as you want.
I use Dungeon Scrawl.
Yeah, keeping it simple. Relatively.
It's not really that simple anymore.
The maps are simple. The program has gotten a little convoluted.
Difficult to use. I mean, I guess, yeah, just tell them, imagine that they're, or you could even just say at the beginning of combat, like, everybody flees immediately, and then they are just on an empty street.
Yeah, that's it. I don't know. Like, I've definitely had lots of people in my scenarios at some point or another, like not in this campaign. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that part just is theater of mind. Mm-hmm. The tokens are for combatants, I think. Mm-hmm. Or potentially, as I'm thinking about for an upcoming video here, if these people are in danger and like there are things the players can interact with or the enemies can interact with, like they're going to be suffering attacks as well. You know, maybe they don't even have an initiative turn, but like for all intents and purposes, they're involved in the combat because they can suffer damage. Yeah, then they should be pictured with a token, but you could just have like one big token representing a bunch. Like here's a small group of these people, here's another small group, and you know together they're a whole crowd. But whatever.
Each villager, you should roll for hit points for each one. Make sure you set those on each individual token for each villager.
And then track them all.
Create an elaborate backstory for every single one. So you can really determine what their actual behavior here would be. Because maybe some of them would fight back. Don't take away the villager's agency. Anyway.
Let's just roll it.
4.
Wow, we're really being so efficient with these rolls. Dungeon Onion. My first game was Theater of Mind. And for the longest time, I didn't know that there really was any other way to play. I mean, same. I've been GMing for several years now, so it was inevitable that I eventually came across minis and mats. At first, I didn't get the point. Why pay money for something that you don't need for a fun game? After a friend's constant insistence, I bought some minis and a paint set and got to work painting them. Instantly addicted. I searched my house for anything else to inflict my poor painting skills on. After I rated every board game of paintable pieces, I tried it out, and yet after all that build-up, the response I got to D&D with minis was a half-hearted meh. It's more fun without the board restricting what we can do. Now I paint minis just for the sake of painting them.
Everyone can have a mini like sat in front of them during the game.
Yeah.
Or you can use your minis as like, this is what this NPC looks like.
Yeah. So it's still like, absolutely still ways to mesh these hobbies together, even if you're not using them for combat necessarily. Like just having visuals is still nice. Mm-hmm. Like we don't do that often with pictures. Again, I think a lot of that is easier with an online game, or like one at least where you have some kind of screen where you could like pull up, this is what this NPC looks like. This is what this building looks like. Here's what the door to the dungeon looks like. But if you are playing in person and you're not like running on a computer or whatever, then minis or anything you're painting is a fun way to show that.
Or you use each mini for each individual villager in a city combat scenario.
Yeah. So you just give a bunch of your minis to the person.
That's what Mr. Seth needs. You just need a lot more minis.
Yeah. I mean, and then it
really add depth.
Yeah. But to Dungeon Onion, I say that's kind of a shame that the other players in your group were not that interested in it. Didn't share your passion for it.
I really hope it wasn't the same guy who bugged you to do it, who said,
Oh, yeah, after a friend's constant insistence. So I hope that person at least was happy with it.
I hope he was, or they were totally thrilled with it.
Yeah. But, hey, that's cool. I'm glad you enjoy the mini painting. And that's something else. Like, I feel like if I started painting minis, I could get really into it. Though it could be hard to find time. I don't know. Let's roll another one.
I game too much.
Yeah.
And with Baldur's Gate coming out on PS5.
Oh my gosh. There goes the rest of your life.
2.
Oh my gosh.
Wow, we're like 5.
So we got to point out, guys, off screen, we usually have to re-roll a bunch of times because we'll like roll the same numbers, of course. But on this episode,
time, no edits.
So far, we've literally just went through all 5 of these without having to re-roll.
I'm going to lose my mind.
Well, we don't even have to roll the last one.
Oh, you're right. I'm going to try anyway because if I roll 3, I'm going to lose my mind.
Yeah. So this is second to last. Ron Wingrove, my Friday night D&D group, has switched to VTT due to geographical separation. Totally natural.
Yep,
so it's a mix between minis and theater of the mind. My Sunday group is in person, but while we all have minis, we tend to save them for big set-piece battles where it's more important to know where everyone and everything is.
That's valid.
Personally, I tend to use theater of the mind more, even for fights. I bring a sheet of paper. Not sure if you can mention brand names. Yeah, I don't see why not. But a certain brand of sticky notes. Post-it? I only know one brand of sticky notes. Makes a 3 feet by 2 feet version.
That's amazing.
Oh, intended for presentations. Yeah, so like a big flip board.
I need that for work.
That works great for sticking to tabletops. I wonder if it's gridded as well, I guess. Sticking to tabletops and draw a map. And let everyone else work on it in their own way. Wait, what? I'm losing track of this.
Do you let your players add like little terrain things?
Okay. Yeah, I tend to find that makes for more creative sessions for both exploration and combat and allows my players to come up with their own solutions to problems. Yeah. So just maybe I think you're saying being more active about, letting people draw stuff on the map.
Yeah, that is really cool. The group participation aspect. Plus then it's not just like the DM is drawing the map and everyone else is just sitting there.
Yeah.
Like waiting.
Yeah. Totally unrelated, but that's something I realized last session. There was a long period where I was having to like mark things on a city map, basically. And I was really like in the moment also deciding like, okay, wait, what should I mark? And it took a while, but thankfully you guys just like started talking. And
we were talking about we were talking about Stormlight Archives, but only 3 of us have read it, so the other 2 were not.
Yeah, it's like half the group. More than half the group, actually.
We were debating what the first ideal of the Knights Radiant truly means.
Okay, so I don't think this one had a question either, but it's another solution, right? Giant sticky map. I assume that has a grid on it, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just for drawing, and everybody can add on it. And it's just easy to, that's very much what in like Critical Role Campaign 1, Matt Mercer did. He always just had big sheets of paper, and he usually had it already drawn. Did you remember this? Vaguely. And everybody would be like, whoa, when he's like pulling out a new giant sheet of paper.
Can you imagine if he just pulled out a sheet of paper now in Campaign 3 when everyone is used to like the crazy maps that he built?
Yeah, that'd be hilarious. Should do it for old time's sake. All right, we got one more to roll. We're trying to see this come up as a 3. Oh,
almost.
It was only a 1 in 6 chance. It was a 2
again. It's a 2.
Guys. It was a 2 again. But here we go. Last one. David Jennings. My main method is theater of the mind with a dry erase map. Oh, look at that. Do you know this guy? Scholar and a gentleman. It means less DM prep, and it's easier for me to adapt when the party does something I hadn't planned for. And they don't notice the difference. The players all have their own minis, and I made a few more for some key NPCs/bosses. When I draw out the map and describe it, my players have got into the habit of asking questions about their surroundings. Are there any methods to climb up to get a better vantage point? Where is cover? Or even looking at weak points in a damaged building. I can make some maps more interesting on the fly. I've found my players use the terrain much more in this way. That being said, I'm aware it isn't the most accessible. Some people are much more visual and would prefer detailed maps or even physical terrain. Which method do you think makes for the most accessible for DMs and players?
It really depends on what your players want.
Yeah.
And what they need.
It definitely,
It varies very much by group.
Yeah, because it's going to be very different, from person to person. My gut reaction says the most acceptable would be a detailed map that everyone can see. But for some people, maybe that's like too much detail and then they'll like get bogged down in it. So yeah, it's going to depend group to group for sure. I think there's these few kind of key options that we've summarized here, like all the way from pure theater of mind to pure detailed terrain pieces, like with bespoke miniatures of every NPC in the crowd and everything in between.
And a little character card that you've handwritten in calligraphy for each villager.
Their driver's license.
Yes, a driver's license, a second form of identification that establishes citizenship in whatever realm you're playing in.
It's very important.
So they can pass their their I9, their fantasy I9.
Look at you human resource. Okay. And for sharing our favorite story / question, this episode's loot winner is Samuel Tier for the awesome Pac-Man ghost dungeon scenario. Very creative. And I hope you get a lot of use out of these $40 of credit in tokens from, was it just tokens.com?
You should know who your own sponsor is.
This person emailed me like 3 days ago. Ziptokens.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and punch that like button.
Punch it.
To be eligible for loot and support this show, consider subscribing or joining Patreon through the links below. Patrons also get a private RSS link to listen to your favorite podcast platform and a new 5e resource every month. Thank you for your support and keep building.
Stop building.